Hey, Brian, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Alan, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, I'm excited because I get to hear a lot of your story at XYPN Live last year when I was given the opportunity to host or moderate a panel on our three members who were working with service members. And, folks may say, like, oh, working with military service members, like that's a great niche. And you kind of did the hold my beer and said, not just service members, I'm going to work with fighter pilots. So I'm excited to learn more about your background and how you sort of came to building a business, a financial planning firm working with fighter pilots. So just by way of background, obviously you spent some time as a fighter pilot. So can you talk to listeners just about your decision to join the Air Force and sort of your journey as an Air Force pilot?
Yeah, you bet. I would summarize it all as it's always better to be lucky than good in life. So I my parents, had very meager means. There was no way they were going to pay for college. So my goal in high school was to find a way to get college paid for. And so I started looking at scholarships, et cetera. I thought the military would be cool. I thought flying would be cool, but it didn't really seem like that was a natural path. I joined ROTC truly just to get college paid for and kind of figured that the Air Force would help me chart a path after that. My junior year was, mid 90s and post Gulf War, there had been a big drawdown in flying. And so most people who joined ROTC didn't think they were going to get a chance to fly. And then they started to open the floodgates back up. And they asked me one day, hey, you interested in flying? I said, sure. And the best part about it was I was healthy enough to do it. And that, just whether it's a heart murmur or some other thing, health takes a lot of people out of the opportunity. So graduated school in computer science and then went off to pilot training. Enjoyed flying the F-16. It was just an amazing experience. Got to do that for, gosh, about 14, 15 years, and was able to go to the Air Force Weapons School, a couple deployments, just a lot of really neat things. And then was offered the opportunity to transition to the F-35 about two-thirds of the way through my career. So I got to spend the last 7 or 8 years doing that. Only
The
one trip.
F-35 just fly itself? I mean, we're at a technology level
Yeah,
where
yeah, yeah. To some degree, it does. Folks will ask me from time to time, which did you like flying better? You fly the F-16. You
Mm.
sort of monitor the F-35, and so the F-16 was definitely a lot more interactive and engaging to fly. But it's anyway. I'll save the flying discussion for another time over a beer. But so I got to fly, and that was just a really cool opportunity. Somewhere along the way, kind of got bitten by the personal finance bug, and I think we'll talk more about that. But that was sort of my path, is I just needed to get college paid for, and then the Air Force said, "Hey, do you want to fly?" I said, "Sure." I was healthy enough to do it. Turns out I liked it, and then kept finding myself in the right place at the right time for cool opportunities along the way.
So I know when I was in ROTC, it was, basically your first 2 years they would pay for with no contract, and sort of going into your junior years when you have to sign your name in blood on the dotted line that, they'll pay for your last 2 years, but then you're committing. In my recollection was it was 4 years active duty or 8 years National Guard or reserves. Um, did you think you would, if you're signing up for this 4 year commitment, did you think you would stay in 20 years? Did you think you would retire with the Air Force, or were you expecting sort of four and out?
So it actually, for pilots, it at the time it was 8 years
Okay.
if you
Because
finish
they're going to
pilot
put you
training.
through flight school. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, they spend at the time the math was about $1 million to get you all the way through flight training, and then now it's even longer. It's 10 years. So I sort of thought, gosh, if I do this for 8 years, that's awfully close to 10, and ten's awfully close to 20. And the
It's almost like
the
the military knows.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the allure of the lifetime benefits was appealing even when I was young. I don't think I could understand then what I understand now, but it was certainly appealing. But I didn't have anything else I was like dying to go do. Computer science was cool in college, but I don't think that I had any particular gift for computer programming, and I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what life doing something in the computer world would look like, because I once I went down the flying path, I sort of went all in on that emotionally. So there didn't really seem like there was a need to decide, 4 years, 8 years, 10 years early on. It was more kind of, hey, just keep blooming where you're planted, and if you like it, keep doing it. It's certainly not toxic. I didn't ever encounter anyone who was like really disappointed that they spent 20 years flying fighter jets and then had a check a month for the rest of their life. So I was willing to at least investigate that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it really does give you the opportunity to have like a true second career. This isn't an encore career where you're in your 60s and you've sort of buttoned things up. Like, you're getting out of the Air Force in your early 40s. I mean,
Mhm.
like you've got a whole. I mean, most people don't even find their career that they stick with until their 40s. So it's not like you were behind. And you learned a ton as a pilot. I mean that when you're in the military as an officer, like there's a lot of training and education. Like the military is really good at developing leaders. And so just, yeah, I'm with you that I don't hear a lot of folks who regret the time that they spent. Usually I hear like regret they got out, or
Yeah.
even regret maybe the wrong word, but just missing it, which, you transitioned out in 2020, it looks like. Do you ever have those moments of missing it and like kind of wanting some of the components that you had that, what made the Air Force great back?
Yeah. So the short answer, no. What I miss the most would be the camaraderie and
Mm,
the daily interaction with super high caliber people. I work from home, and most of my clients I meet them remotely, so there's that limited social engagement, but I still get enough social time, and the people I work with are the same people I used to work with, and so I that itch gets scratched. And frankly, the further you go in military service, especially when you started out flying, the less you do things that are relevant to flying. You eventually get to the point where you're not flying at all. I did one tour in the Pentagon, and it's not to say that I don't want to go back. It's just that I'm not going back. It was kind of the approach I came with out of that. What I saw was not only did I want to go and do this second career, I had this itch I needed to scratch, but I also saw what the default future would be if I stayed
Mhm.
in, and that was not something I was willing to go down, and a path I was willing to go down. I think that would have caused regret to stay in any longer.
That's fair. It is such an interesting thing where they spend $1 million training you, and then the longer you're in, the less and less you get to fly, and eventually you just ride a desk and watch
Yeah,
everybody else fly. But
exactly.
that is the reality. So yeah, you mentioned you got bit by the personal finance bug. At what point, sort of in your military journey, did you sort of discover this idea of financial planning?
Yeah, when I hadn't done any. So
Mm.
when I when I was stationed at Eglin Air Force Base the first time, starting in 2003, my wife and I bought our first house. We bought, VA loan, paid like $180,000 for the house. Felt like super expensive, but it was in the run up to the housing crisis and everything. So 3 years later, we sold this $180,000 house for almost $380,000,
Oh wow.
and we walked away from that thinking like, oh, well, clearly we're financial geniuses, like we just made all this money. And my next assignment was out in Las Vegas, and this was 2006, and so we took about half that money that we made and we put it into 529s for the kiddos and our own investments, but the rest we dumped into a house out there, and we paid about the same amount, about 360ish, for a house out there in 2006. 3 years later, when we sold it, 3.5 years later, it was worth $140,000.
Mm.
And I realized it turns out I'm not actually a financial genius. Um, when we were trying to figure out what to do to get out of that situation, the options looked something like sell everything, including the kids' 529s, in order to come to the closing table and zero out the balance. Like my net worth was essentially 200,000, and that was the bill that it would have taken to get out from underneath that house. Option B was to go ahead and rent it out, but I'd be negative at least $1,000 a month, and my math said it would be 10 years or more before it could likely recover back. It turns out I was fairly close on that guess. And then option C was kind of like hope for some other solution, and fortunately C worked out in that the 2009 stimulus bill included a provision that expanded what's known as the homeowner assistance program. It's a government program for when basically military communities are disrupted by things like base closures and such. They applied that to the housing crisis. So we still lost 30 or $40,000, but we didn't lose $200,000. I came out of that pretty scarred, thinking like, how did I get myself here? So I really started to dig into all things personal finance. I got big into Dave Ramsey, ended up actually his course for quite a few years at various assignments. And what I found was more and more I would be, instead of talking fighter tactics in the bar the whole time, I'd be talking personal finance tactics. And then by the time I was a commander, the first time, I realized that my schedule was filling up with people wanting to come in and have personal finance counseling sessions and things like that. And I would get done with that and just be really energized. And so
Mm.
that's really kind of what it came down to, was to the edge of a crisis, got really lucky, kind of got religion about it. And then as I got that religion, I probably started to proselytize a little bit, and I really enjoyed it. And I just liked helping other people. Very service is about serving and helping other people. This felt like a natural adjunct to it.
Yeah, and the option D, which you didn't mention, which is, you declare bankruptcy, right? But that's
Right.
not an
Yeah.
option for service members because, as an officer, if one bankruptcy, right, it takes your security clearance and then you can't do your job and basically you get the boot. Um,
Yeah, I mean, the financial crisis sort of disproved that a little bit, but that was
mm,
definitely the fear at the time. At the time, everyone thought if you had a foreclosure, short sale, or bankruptcy, you were done. It took a long time for that to get a little bit dispelled. The reality is, even today, if you fess up and go into your security manager and say, "Hey, I've got this problem. Here's all the fact data. Here's how I'm handling it," and you are forthright and just it, not trying to hide it, not trying to make yourself an espionage risk, you're probably going to be fine. But back then, we did not know that. Back then, everyone was thinking, "I've got to jink out of this risk of a foreclosure, short sale, bankruptcy, because yeah, otherwise I lose my job. I don't just lose my house and my money."
that's great to know. I thought that was a foregone conclusion, bankruptcy and you lose security clearance. So that's good to know that we've learned that sometimes mistakes do happen, and it doesn't mean you're going to steal money or secrets
Yeah,
from the government.
exactly.
So you're having these conversations. I assume at this point, you said you were a commander, so you're starting to approach that 20 years. When did you start to really think, I wonder if I should just start my own financial planning firm, or maybe go get a job in financial planning? I guess sort of what was sort of that thought process?
Yeah, my wife and I had met with a I believe he was a Garrett planner back in the early 2000s. He might have been NAFA actually, and it was a really great experience. I mean, I was highly allergic to the firm that is well known in military circles, that has offices next to the pawn shops and payday loan centers outside of all the gates, and I think that's not a coincidence that they tend to be located there. Anyway, I was really allergic to their act, and I'd seen what they'd done to a lot of folks, and I had a really good experience with a fee only planner who just gave advice long before XY made it cool.
Mhm.
And then in 2016, 2017, I was feeling the same thing that I think a lot of my clients feel, and that is that my complexity felt like it was growing. I didn't understand the interaction between taxes and investments at the level that I felt like I needed to make good decisions for my family. I thought the mistakes could have zeros behind them. And so I went and met with a planner. His name is Kurt Sheldon, goes by JAR, former F-16 pilot, runs his own very successful financial planning and tax practice in Alexandria. So shout out to JAR. He's a great mentor. I went and met with him to see about having him help my family. It was a great experience. And I walked out of it and said, I'm sure I should hire him, but I want his job.
Mm,
And and I was serving in the bowels of the five-sided well of souls on the Potomac over there, and decided, you know what, I know that if I stay in the Air Force, I'm going to have too much risk of coming back and having my soul just gobbled up by the Pentagon and other similar staff jobs. And I can't do that. Like, life's too short. So I thought, well, I can do the default. I can go, start my airline training and get my ATP certification and all those things that you do to start prepping for an airline career, or I can figure out how to become a financial planner like that guy I just met. And so researched, all the things you do, found Kitsis, started drinking from that fire hose, and realized that I was not going to be satisfied if I didn't find a way to become a CFP. And so I
mm.
signed up through the Boston University program, and I kind of laid out a path of, okay, here's when I could retire. Here's when I probably would want to try to take the test, and I'll figure out how to actually enter the profession later. But let me at least start doing this long lead item of get the CFP marks.
And I assume you were able to use the GI Bill to pay for the CFP certification or the education?
Nah, I just used cash. Like we had
Okay.
enough money. It wasn't that much, and I also I wanted to preserve the GI Bill for my kiddos,
Oh, that's
and my
fair. That's fair. Because if
yeah.
you start to use it, your kids can't use it. That's good. That's
Well,
good to remember.
or they just won't have as much.
Mhm.
And I figured, the CFP certificate at Boston University, I think at the time it was like 5 grand, whereas college costs a lot more than that. So the utility was much higher for college. But I also felt as though if I didn't pay for it myself, I wouldn't necessarily have the kind of commitment device that would
Mm,
make me lean in the way I needed to. And so I was kind of hacking my own shortfalls in terms of follow through there.
that's fair. Is that pretty typical with folks who are in the military who are, you see that 20-year coming up? Like, it does seem like folks tend to make like a multi-year plan. Like, I don't know, you're 16, 17, they start thinking about it, which I would say is unique. A lot of folks just, in a lot of careers, they just get fed up and they quit and then they try to figure out, career change. But you really had a couple of year lead time, it sounds like, to really make a plan and make good decisions and get ready.
Yeah, yeah, no, I that is my nature. I am a planner. So I definitely did not want to go into a default future. And like I said, the default future for a fighter guy is you're either doing business development for one of the big prime defense contractors, lucrative, but just not fulfilling for me. And then same thing for airlines. Like I still every time I walk through an airport and I see airline pilots waiting around eating a hamburger, waiting to go fly away from their families. That just was not going to be the right fit for me.
No,
So
that makes
I
sense.
knew I had to come up with a plan. And then I was, like pretty much everyone else in XY, I was pretty allergic to the idea of sales. And I had found out enough by that point to know that the easy way into the industry is a sales path. And
Mhm.
I couldn't see myself doing that. So it did seem like to go the advice only path, I was going to have to, get some marks and kind of lay out a plan that was going to take a longer time to get started.
So you got out of the military in the middle of 2020. So here we are in the middle of COVID. Like, what did you think at that time? Like, what have I done? Like, could you have re-upped at that point, or were you like there was no option at that point?
So I think I was not that worried, and
Mhm.
part of it is I'm not a natural worrier. I'm a planner, and I also tend to take a lot of solace in statistics and norms. And so I frequently joke with new clients who are a couple of years behind me on the path, and I'm working with them that I've yet to meet a homeless fighter pilot. It all works out fine, and the same is true for other military professionals. Like it works out fine in the end. You'll find a path. There's you're not going to be living in a car eating cat food. And so I kind of just hit the I believe button a lot when it comes to scary things in the future. And then, oh, by the way, you do have kind of a nice safety net. Like the family has health care for life because of
Mhm.
that military retirement, which going back to what my 18-year-old self didn't know, but had an inkling would be good, is probably the most pivotal reason why I'm able to do what I'm doing is because I don't have to worry about healthcare for my family. It's a budget dust line item at this point. So between that and the fact that I would have a military retirement check that would, kind of hit that minimum dignity floor, if you will, stealing from Jim Saulnier there on that topic or on that term, but like that would cover our mortgage and most food and utilities, and so I just wasn't worried about making ends meet, even though there was COVID, and so yeah, it was a little scary, but again, I hit the I believe button a lot just because I didn't actually see any four horsemen running around that I felt like I needed to worry about.
Yeah, I am constantly amazed by the number of advisors who took the leap to become entrepreneurs in the middle of COVID. And sometimes it's overly optimistic, like, oh, this thing will be done in 2 months. And sometimes, yeah, you have a bit of a safety net, but still, like entrepreneurship is jumping off a cliff blindfolded, and doing it in the middle of COVID is like it's almost like taking the blindfold off. Like you know what you're doing and you know the timing. And we had hundreds of advisors do the same and make that leap, which is I'm always very impressed by the conviction of advisors that just knew that was the path they wanted to take. So middle 2020, you're out of the military, and then you launched in January of 2021, correct?
Correct. And the other caveat too, that kind of going back to why it was not that big of a deal to do this during COVID is I had made the determination that I would take at least a temporary defense related job in
Mm,
order to create kind of a lily pad out of the Air Force to make sure that if financial planning wasn't what I thought it was going to be, then I had a safety net to kind of go back on. And so I did have a kind of a remote telework with a little bit of travel defense consulting job for my first year out, which was ideal. I mean, it was I couldn't ask for a better setup because it did allow me to, you know, test out the waters on defense consulting, but it also provided a nice extra paycheck while I was finishing getting registered, starting to build out processes, and then initially taking on clients.
okay.
So
So was it a part-time gig or that was a full-time job?
technically full time. It certainly felt part time just because, remote work was new to everyone. So I think a lot of entities were having a hard time, making full use of their people. So when we traveled, it was more than full time, and when we didn't travel, sometimes it was difficult to fill 40 hours. But 40 hours of remote work, as I know isn't always 40 hours as busy as 40 hours, in an office environment. So it
Absolutely.
definitely allowed enough white space that I could harvest.
And we do get a lot of questions from advisors that say, like, can you really have a full-time job and start your firm on the side, as sort of the part-time thing? And it sounds like well, yeah, clearly you had success doing that. How did you balance time for your full-time job, time for the firm, time for family and for yourself? How did you sort of work through that, and maybe some of the conversations, if you had any, with your spouse about how to make that work?
Yeah. I think being clear-eyed about it, there wasn't a ton of balance in that season, and there probably still isn't the level of, in fact, there isn't the level of balance. It's probably gotten worse lately. And so I think that idea of work-life balance is nice and aspirational, but the reality is the best I'm probably going to get is like seasonal balance during that time. So I'm an early bird. I'm awake by 3 or 4 each morning just because that's what my body got programmed to do by years of early flying briefs, and then I spent a lot of time doing triathlon, and that was the only time you could get extra training in was morning times. So that has always created a block of like high energy, high brain power time, generally before the rest of the family is even awake, and that made it very easy to just get up and grind on anything that had to do with the firm before checking in and being ready to work for the defense consulting firm. And then just beyond that, being efficient with whatever time was available. Travel periods would also create time where I'm stuck on a plane. Well, I can't do anything for the firm because it's classified work. So I'm on the plane. I can write blog articles and start to
Mm.
generate content and do other things like that. So I also, like any small businessman or small business person, I'm very trapped in that mindset of always thinking about the firm. And so, if I'm doing yard work on the weekend and I have an idea and I run into the office real quick and jam it out, like, yeah, it's my wife. I think it realized, well, his brain's going to be somewhere. He's going to be out planning for a triathlon or doing one, or he's going to be doing this business thing, or otherwise thinking about a lot of different things. And yet, I think the one thing I probably do fairly well is I use all of that flexibility to snap to whatever the most important thing is. So the fact that I was working from home always made it really easy to be there when my daughters were launching for school, go to the gym with my daughters in the morning, be there when they got home, make dinner some of the time. So shooting for balance here and there, but being realistic, balance has not been a thing, I think, by objective measures.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's always hard to measure, especially when you're an entrepreneur. It's hard to measure hours worked because, like you said, if you're training for a triathlon, there is no training that gives you more time to think than
Yeah,
triathlon training.
yeah,
And so, if you're out on a long bike ride or you're swimming and you're thinking about something with the business, is that hours worked or not? I don't know. I would say no, but you're kind of doubling up at times,
yeah.
and it's really about, in my opinion, it's really about being on the same page as your partner, that everyone's aligned on what it takes, and the energy that and the time that it takes to build the business. So you launched in January 21. Tell me about
Mhm.
that first year. Like the first year is wildly different for every advisor. I guess what were you kind of expecting from that year, and what was the reality that you faced in those first 12 months?
Yeah, I was expecting essentially what a lot of reading on kitsis.com and listening to his podcast would have you expect, which it's going to be a slow slog. It's going to be painful. You're going to hemorrhage cash. You're going to be struggling to get sets and reps in front of prospects. I think it was never slow, and part of that was, full-time job on the side to try to keep things in, keep money flowing in so the family didn't take a standard of living hit. That said, the probably the best tailwind that I've experienced is that with 23 years in the Air Force, I had a pretty broad personal and professional network, and I'm a huge believer in the idea of, give 99% away for free and just help everyone whenever you can, and it'll come back the right way. And that has just been true. So what I found was when I launched, I literally on January 1st, I sent an email to basically all my friends, and I just said, hey, y'all know I've been pursuing the stream for a long time, and I am open for business. So if you need anything, I'm here to help. And I got a couple of people were like, how do I get an appointment? And so
Mm.
I had a couple prospect meetings in my first month that were, again, some of them were actually, one was my former boss and another one was a former subordinate that like within the last year, I'm writing a performance report on one and the other one's writing a performance report on me. And now they both want to be clients. I'm like, that's pretty darn cool.
That is cool.
Um, yeah. And so again, I think some luck there, but that luck was probably, built up over 22 years of just meeting a lot of people and trying to do right by them. The other thing that I think helped out early on was I stole the idea from Andy Panko of creating a Facebook group. And so I built a private Facebook group called Fighter Pilot Finance. And I initially I had written a bunch of articles during my waiting to register time that thought I'd put out as content. And so I started to put those onto the Facebook group initially, and I've largely kept the Facebook group separate from my firm. I've tried to keep it as an educational outreach place as opposed to part of a lead gen funnel. It naturally does throw off people who will look me up and
Oh
be
yeah.
like, hey, but when I started to do that, and then I realized, okay, I'm being kind of hit and miss and inconsistent on it. So about midway through January of first month of the firm, I thought, what if I commit to doing content of some sort Monday through Friday every day for a year? Like, let me just kind of come up with a BHAG on this. And so I thought, all right, I'll do a long form thing on Monday and then some kind of micro content on along some themes. So Monday is just a general money topic. It's whatever my long form blog is. Tuesday is something sort of technical. Wednesday is something kind of like wisdom, financial or just life. Thursday is generally some sort of tip of how to do something better, and then Friday tends to be more of a potpourri of topics. But that gave me like an organizing construct, and also something to do that was sort of a virtuous cycle, because now I'm constantly refining my ideas, I'm generating ideas, I'm doing research. It's causing me to build out things that will eventually become products. I've got, like any planner, you've got a nonstop source of content from things you encounter with prospects and clients. So just doing that gave me something to both generate prospects, but then also something to do until the prospects showed up. And that was probably the first 6ish months. Cutting to the chase, by the end of the year, I had 30 clients signed on across AUM one time, and
30 clients in the first 12 months.
yeah, yeah.
That's monstrous. How many of those clients are you still working with on an ongoing basis, would you say, out of those 30?
Of the original 30, I think I lost one, and um, I think I lost one that it was a retainer client that by the end of the year they were just too busy and they were having all sorts of life issues and they could not meet, and so we mutually agreed to call knock it off. Of that 30, about 23 were
Wow.
retainer or AUM.
Yep.
And most are retainer only, not AUM. I only have a handful of AUM clients still, and so then I think 3 or 4 were one-time plan, and then the other 3 or 4 were hourly.
So 23 ongoing clients through your first year. So I want listeners to hear me say this is not normal. This is not typical. Do not make your financial plans around this, but it does show the power of relationships and tapping into a niche that you've spent the last 20 years developing connections into. I mean, I could launch a firm tomorrow and say I work with fighter pilots, but like you may be the only fighter pilot I know. So like, all right, so I'm gonna call you, and then I gotta go to bars and meet fighter pilot. I don't know. Like it's just a hard, it would take me 20 years to get to a point where I could have 23 ongoing clients. And it really does speak to the power of again those relationships and leveraging those relationships. And also I think is probably a testament to the fact that you did right by people in the military. If you were making enemies left and right, you may not have had the same level of success, in having them trust you with their finances. So that is a monstrous 2021. Where are you sort of at tracking wise for 2023? What are you expecting your revenue to be at this year? How many ongoing clients?
Yeah, so I should pull up the little chart here because have the actual numbers. Should have had that ready. Give me 1 second.
I would say most advisors don't have these numbers, so
But
at all. So
I did just finally get the XY benchmarking survey done, so I felt like I'd been taken to task yet again. So I've got 51 active clients right now. Of those, 3 are currently one-time plan, and 10 are hourly. So the hourly ones, it's hit and miss how much you work with them in a year,
yep.
and so that makes 38 are either AUM or retainer right now.
Okay.
So the year two, to be honest, I was like, whoa, what happened? Things really slowed down in probably the first 2/3 of year two. And then now what I've realized is that the clients or the prospects show up in the fall when they realize, oh my gosh, I got to do stuff before the end of the year. And they show up in the
Mm,
spring when they're doing their taxes and they realize, oh my gosh, I can't get hit that way on taxes again next year. And so now I'm sort of like, okay, that's how this is going to go.
there's some
There's going to be a surge.
seasonality.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Um,
that makes sense.
yeah, and so revenue wise, I think conservatively, I'll be a little over 200 of gross revenue this year. It may end up being a bit higher than that, but it'll be conservatively just a little bit over 200. And then I think my top line for that first year was just under 70, or right around 70, and then last year. So year one was about 70. Year two, I think the top line was about 160. I think year three will be a little over 200, maybe more.
Unbelievable, man. Congratulations on the success, because this is, I would say, you maybe by year 4, it sounds like, as because you're not just, it doesn't sound like you're just trying to grow the firm as big as you can. By year 4, I think you're going to come back to the median, revert to the mean, if you will,
Yeah,
in terms
yeah,
of sort
I
of
would
what
expect.
what we see,
Yeah.
the typical advisor do by year 4. But year 1 and 2, you did significantly higher revenue, and I would say than the typical firm who's starting from scratch. But also, it's interesting that you did have so much revenue in that first year, despite working with a lot of retainer clients, which, like, a retainer client who comes on in November maybe pays you 200, $300 because they only pay
Right,
you for a month or two. It's not like you get that
right.
full year fee. And so that's just fantastic. I want to hear more about the Facebook group, because that is, we have a few advisors doing Facebook groups. It's one of the reasons, we were intentional about building, when we first built our archiving solution, building in the group archiving was really important, because we knew we had advisors that were doing that. But that's still pretty new and unique, I would say, in the advisory space. So you're
Mhm.
sharing content there. Are you doing any, I don't know, live Q and A's, or posting about your financial planning firm, or is it truly just you sharing content, and are others sharing content? I guess, what does that really look like?
Yeah, I really wanted it to be as vibrant as Andy Panko's. It used to be taxes and retirement. I think now it's retirement planning education. Because I would watch that and see how many people per day would jump. Like someone would be like, "Hey, I just heard about Irma. What's that about?" And it was
Mm.
like a Bogleheads forum where hundreds of people would be like, "Oh, I know the answer." And so I was really hoping to get to that level. I find that I am the primary generator of content. If it's compelling content, I'll know it because people will start to ask questions and there'll be back and forth that I can sit back and watch or occasionally try to inject something helpful. I have I've tried to be as open with that group as possible. It's I mean I call it fighter pilot finance, and if you try to join, there are a couple gatekeeper questions that will help me understand if you're going to be a contributor to the community or other. But I want spouses in there too, and I want people who are not just fighter pilots, like if they're military members, people I know, or people who are friends of people in the group, like welcome to join because the idea is education. Uh, so sometimes other people will post their things, but I have not. been able to get as much of that going as I would like to see. I'd like it to be something more that I just created and other people show up at the water cooler or the bar, as it were. So far, it's been more of kind of just me standing up on a virtual soapbox. I haven't gone to the point of doing like live events mainly for just bandwidth. I don't yet have the time, and so I got to triage, the crucial things for the business. But I do try to answer questions in there, whenever they pop up, if someone else doesn't get to it first. And my preference is that especially if it's a softball question and someone else in the group can answer it, that's even better.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I do hear advisors should on themselves a lot, and I sort of did that too there, where it's like, oh well, I should be doing live content. It's like, well, based on your numbers, you really need to do less marketing, not more marketing. So it's okay to say like, I've got enough clients. Like growth is great,
Yeah.
depending on goals for the business. So when I go to your website, I'll say there, the imagery is very fighter pilot. I mean, there's a fighter, like, what is this, an F-16, like on your homepage.
Hmm.
Even your plan delivery, sort of like the steps of the process is a flight plan.
Hmm.
Whereas most folks use sort of a graph with lines and that sort of thing. Like you've even got a flight plan. So, um, can you talk to me about just, well, I guess what percentage, because you mentioned service members. So, like, what percentage of these ongoing clients would you say are fighter pilots or were fighter pilots versus sort of other members of the military at this point?
Yeah, the number varies as new ones come on, but I would say the last count I did was about 90 to 95% are military and veteran, and then of the total, about two-thirds are current or former fighter pilots, and so in the middle there's some service members that I've got, like, I think of it, got a Air Force psychologist in there, and then I've got some maintainers and
Mm,
folks of different backgrounds, because I mean, there are very few unique financial aspects about flying fighters compared to any other part of the military. It's much more, I think, about the culture, understanding what their service has been like, what their future career prospects are going to be like, and some mindset things. And clearly there's a natural fit of, well, hey, this is the thing I did, and so I know what it's like for those people. So like that's a natural niche. I have tried to approach both how I built my firm, how I built my services, how I built my pricing, how I do my marketing, all from what I think is there's almost some sort of like Fight Club-esque rules of the culture of fighter pilots, and one of them is just that the fighter pilots generally trust other fighter pilots implicitly.
mm,
That comes from like how we fight. Two squadrons from two different bases that probably very few people know, very few other people in the other unit, can show up in the same war, read the instructions of what they're supposed to do, the fragmentary order, and then go and fight together, having never really trained together. And the way you get there is, A, we train off the same tactics manual, but B, we trust everyone's a professional and they'll do their job the way they're supposed to. And so that trust of other fighter pilots is a big part of it. And then there's also, frankly, there's definitely a strong do-it-yourself streak in the community across all things, all kind of adulting tasks, if you will. And to some degree, there's also maybe a little bit of a mistrust of people who are not in the tribe. Like if you're not in
mm.
the tribe, you maybe have to earn it a little bit to get the trust. So that is all sort of structured how I have built out the firm, is just acknowledging that.
Yeah, I was going to ask sort of, yeah, what some of the technical planning differences are, but it's not so much tax planning and estate planning is different for a fighter pilot than an infantry soldier. It's
Right.
more so the psychology side of just lived experience, like I said, that implicit trust, and just a real understanding of what they've lived through and what they're dealing with, and also to your point, I like the point that there's probably a type of personality who's attracted to being a fighter pilot, right? Like there's going to be some commonalities to folks who choose to take that on as a career, and that probably also leads to some commonalities just in terms of personality for when you're working, like I said, maybe DIYers, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the DIY thing, like as I mentioned, most of my clients are retainer. I fairly actively discourage my accumulators from turning their money over to myself, or
Mm,
I don't mind if they do a robo on the cheap or something like that. But the reality is, even like big box brokerages that do a cheap CFP service type thing, they're doing the same things that you can do. Like they're going to come up with an asset allocation. Well, I'm going to help you come up with an asset allocation. They're going to have a timeline on which they rebalance. Well, I'm going to help you do that. And it's really not all that hard. They're going to occasionally tax loss harvest. Yep, I'm going to help you do that as well, and I'm going to teach you about it. And so that's been a good fit because it's how I wanted to be treated before when I was a consumer of financial planning, and I very much find that that's how my clientele would like to be treated.
You're quickly approaching and really are hitting what we call the scaling phase. You've blown through building and are hitting this point where we can say 150,000 in recurring revenue, and then starting to look at capacity constraints in terms of number of clients and that sort of thing. And so you've got some big decisions coming up, and I'm curious if you've thought about the big decision being, do you want to grow the practice? Do you want to hire administrative staff? Do you want to hire other advisors? Like, what are you thinking? I guess, have you thought about it? What decisions have you made, or where are you at with making the decision on sort of what the business is going to look like long term?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm thinking about it. It's more like anguishing about it. When I started out, I was hardcore. I will be solo. I will stay solo, and I'll get to capacity, and I'll be happy there. And and other naiveties. I earlier this year hired. I call her an intern. She's the high school senior of a friend, and she now posts all my content. So I generate the content and I put it in a folder on Dropbox, and she takes it from there. And that was like my first foray into paying for help. I guess, but prior to that, I paid for website help, but like I still do my own books and things like that. I am now, I think, maturing to the point where I realize that I don't have to do it all, and it's really important to keep building out the list of the things only I can do and want to do, the whole highest best use, and then what to do or what to start to delegate. And I'll take a look at whether that's, outsource in some sort of 1099 or buy services or truly hire an employee. The really tough one is eh, the reality. I did get into this to help people. It's not just putting food on the table. And so it's going to feel pretty bad to say, hey, I can't help you because I'm at
Mm,
capacity. And I think that does say that I'm probably leaning more towards, okay, let's see what this would look like to have someone else who can do, most of what I can do. I still don't have to grow so fast that I like bring on another advisor that's just like me. I think what I can do is get that support and hopefully develop someone who is interested in doing this and kind of give them a career path. And that, of course, has the virtue that I will finally own a business instead of owning a job. Because I'm pretty clear-eyed
mm,
right now that while I may have an LLC, the reality is I own a job, and there's not any value for my family to get if I go out there and get hit by a bus. So building beyond just me also gives my family a chance to have some value when I'm gone, or if I decide to retire from it, then there's something there. So I'm leaning more towards growing. I don't have any enterprise visions. I think boutique or somewhere between solo with help and
mm.
boutique is probably what appeals right now. But the main driver of it is I'm going to have a really hard time telling someone I can't serve you.
I love it because was it last year or 2 years ago at the XYPN conference? Michael was giving a presentation on sort of this concept of solo and boutique and enterprise. And one of the things he said, and it was the first time I'd heard him say it, was that so often firms who are niche focused, mission driven around a niche, become boutiques because they can't help themselves. And I had to think
Yeah,
about that. And all of a sudden I started making a list in my head of like, they did that, they did that. And
yeah,
it really does come down to a passion for this niche, and more so than a passion, not I should not just not a passion for building business. Like some people are entrepreneurial, like I just want to build good business, and whatever we do in that business, I don't really care about. Like I just want to run a business. Some people are like that. Some people want to make a job for themselves. But so often I do hear, and we're seeing this come to fruition, that when you're really passionate about a niche, it's just so hard to say no. And if
yeah,
you know you have the option to refer those folks to somebody else, and we see that as well, where an XYPN member, a former fighter pilot that they might get now, will make their own firm and give you a referral source, and that sort of thing. But so often folks do end up bringing in other advisors for that reason, is just because they just care about the niche and they want to be sure that they're helping that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, truly, the thing that gives me the most energy is when I have a client or prospect meeting, and I'm able to lift some monkey off of someone's back because
Mm.
they thought they had a terrible situation. I can be like, nope, this is how we're going to solve it, and you can just see the sigh of relief. And so the idea that, well, okay, I'll just charge more, I'll skinny down the roster by charging more, that's sort of goes against the niche. And oh, by the way, kind of going back to like serving this niche, the military tends to generate a bunch of people who expect everything for free because
Mm.
they get free healthcare for all their time. They get free legal advice up to some level. They get even free financial help slash advice to some level. And I know I was this way. I still struggle to pay out of pocket for professional services. And since I like the retainer model a lot, I'm also going to be sensitive to the fact that when I look at people's budget, usually my fee is second only to their car payment or their mortgage. Like
Yep.
they pay me more than they do for most other things. So that does sort of create a ceiling if you're not going to do on how much you can make per client. And for now, I'm okay with that because again, the idea is to help the people, not get the most out of their wallet that I can.
Yeah, ability to pay is a really critical important a really critical piece when you're looking at how much can you charge clients. It's not just keep raising, keep raising, keep raising, and you'll be fine. But, when you are in a niche, there may be a ceiling that you've got to
Yeah.
acknowledge, and that's where you got to back into. Am I going to be able to make enough money by working with enough clients, charging this fee for this to work? But it sounds like the answer is yes. These are not clients who are paying you $50 a month, but this is probably not a niche where you're going to charge $2,000 a month, right? Like there
No.
is a point somewhere between those two numbers.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So what's next for you? You're having a lot of success. You mentioned that maybe balance is actually getting a little more out of whack because of busyness in the firm. You're starting to think about this advisor. Like what's next for you and the firm over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, I do think the big pivot is going to be bringing on someone who is doing more than just say marketing help and developing that person and continuing to figure out how do I load shed to that person and start to claim back, not just claim back time on the weekends, but claim back, early morning time or
Mhm.
evening time and hopefully claim back, some of the headspace that just naturally drifts towards thinking about the firm. I do have an entrepreneurial bent, so I've got another business idea that actually aligns with this that I think actually will create the ability to maybe hire one person and have that person work in both endeavors. And so that's appealing to because again there's alignment. I'll talk about it more if I roll it out. But I also want to continue to just refine my expertise. So I did the CFP path, then I went on and did enrolled agent. I think the next credential that appeals to me is the RICP. I don't know that I'll just keep going for more alphabet soup, but I also acknowledge that I've got 2 decades worth of experience that I don't have that I need to continue to I guess fight my own imposter syndrome by making sure that I follow every curiosity as well as just every path that leads towards knowledge that I can then turn around and help my clients with. So I think I'll continue to just sharpen the sword, and then I'll let this idea of growth kind of sort itself out. Like I said, I'm leaning towards growing because I think that I'll have to.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, this has been so much fun. So I'll ask you the final question, and that is, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what do you think that piece of advice would be?
So if I scope my younger self to like the guy who was getting ready to start a firm and kind of wondering is this really going to work out, definitely keep hitting the I believe button. But then beyond that, the thing that is probably the biggest generator of success is sets and reps in front of prospects.
Hmm.
And so finding ways to do that. In my case, I like to write. I'm a podcast junkie, but I've never figured out how I would turn podcasting into something I can do as fast as I can write. So I did start writing before I launched my firm. If I could go back, there was a lot of time that I frittered that I could have built a really cool content library. I think that would have been very helpful early on as far as something that would have helped a lot. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, I had that defense consulting job for about a year before I had enough clients that I could convince myself, hey, you can take money out of the firm, put food on the table. Family's not going to notice the difference, and bank account won't grow as fast, but that's okay. I think I would have also told myself, hey, if it's growing, it's going to keep growing. Detach from other
Mm,
entanglements as early as you can to focus on it. Because I had a lot of head trash about that, and it took some serious time with Tim Ferriss's fear setting TED talk to get past it. So, but yeah, really just hit the I believe button, generate content, and really every chance you can to be in front of a prospect, do that, because that's clearly what generates clients, but it also is what refines your ability to prove to people that you're the one that can help them.
I love it. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share the wild ride you've been on for the last couple of years. But you've had a lot of success. I commend you for that, and look forward to seeing how things continue to progress for you and the firm in the future. So, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.